What if I told you that in 1851, one young man's beauty and intelligence ignited greed, obsession, and darkness so deep that it shook Memphis to its very core? Marcus Thornton wasn't like any other man enslaved in the city. His sharp mind, extraordinary looks, and quiet confidence made him more than valuable. It made him dangerous to those who believed they controlled everything, to those who thought they could bend fate to their will. Some families, blinded by ambition, saw in him a threat to their secrets, their wealth, their very power, and in their obsession they were willing to cross lines that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. Marcus's existence forced people to confront the unimaginable. Families who built empires on wealth and influence suddenly found themselves vulnerable, exposed. Their reputations, money, and dark secrets were all on the line, and some would go to unspeakable lengths to protect what they had. Betrayal, manipulation, even murder became tools in their quest for control, and the line between victim and oppressor blurred in ways no one could anticipate. But I want to ask you something before we continue. Where are you watching from right now? Take a moment to think about that. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Noctivox Dark Stories. I've poured countless hours, months of research and heart into creating stories like this, so you can witness the dark truths history tried to hide. And tonight, you're about to step into one of the most twisted and shocking tales Memphis ever saw. In 1851, Memphis was a city of contrasts, of immense wealth and devastating cruelty. The streets bustled with trade, the cotton industry flourished, and families built fortunes while countless lives were enslaved in silence. In this world, Marcus Thornton was born, and unlike others, he did not go unnoticed. It wasn't just his appearance, though he was striking. It was his mind, his intelligence, and an aura that commanded attention. People saw in him a rare brilliance that made him both desirable and dangerous. The very qualities that should have been celebrated became the source of obsession and envy. Three families in particular, the Harringtons, the Daltons, and the Caendishes, became fixated on Marcus, each wealthy, influential, and morally corrupt in their own way. They measured value in power, profit, and control, and Marcus became a symbol of all they coveted and feared losing. Every glance, every word, every choice he made was watched, calculated, manipulated. His presence stirred jealousy and greed that would push these families to commit acts of deception and cruelty beyond imagination. Marcus was no ordinary man in a society that saw human life as property. His existence challenged the rules, threatened reputations, and exposed secrets that others would kill to protect. Money, status, and deadly secrets intertwined with his life, and the chaos he would unleash was far greater than anyone could foresee. In a city built on the suffering of others, Marcus's courage, intelligence, and quiet defiance became a spark that would ignite fires powerful enough to leave permanent scars on Memphis, the families, and everyone foolish enough to underestimate the force of one determined life. The city of Memphis was alive with whispers and shadows, but behind closed doors, the true plotting began. Edmund Harrington, a man whose ambition matched his cruelty, sat with Charles Dalton late into the night, maps and documents spread across the table. Their plan was precise, almost surgical in its cruelty. Marcus Thornton, the young man whose presence threatened their carefully constructed lives, had to be taken. They spoke in hushed tones, weighing risks and rewards, imagining how they could manipulate, deceive, and ultimately claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. Every glance, every gesture was calculated. Marcus was no ordinary slave, no mere possession. He was a symbol of power, and they were determined to bend him to their will. Yet in the shadows, another player moved silently. Richard Cavendish, the third in this triangle of greed and ambition, had his own plans. Plans that no one could predict. Plans that danced dangerously close to chaos. He knew that to achieve his goals, distraction was essential. And so the warehouse, his pride, his empire of goods and influence, was set alight. Smoke curled into the night sky, flames consuming everything in a spectacle of terror and confusion. The city awoke to the roar of fire and panic, citizens rushing to the streets, and in the midst of it, the fate of Marcus hung precariously. Was this accident, or something far more sinister? Rumors swirled immediately. Some whispered of insurance fraud, a clever trick to collect money and cover debts. Others suggested threats from creditors who had grown impatient with Richard's dealings. Every theory had a ring of plausibility. Every suggestion carried a sense of urgency. But the truth, known to only a few, was far more deliberate. Someone had orchestrated this chaos not to destroy property, but to divert attention, to distract those who watched too closely, to give the schemers a moment to act without interference. Marcus's life, his very movements, became the prize in a game of shadows and secrets that no one fully understood. As the flames licked the night sky, the chaos within the city mirrored the turmoil building around Marcus. He vanished from sight just as quickly as the fire spread. Was it luck, or had someone planned every detail of his disappearance? Every hour that passed without news of him amplified the fear and suspicion. Edmund and Charles believed their plan was unfolding perfectly, unaware that Richard's silent maneuvers were already rewriting the rules of the game. And for Marcus, the world around him had shifted. He was no longer just a man trying to survive. He had become a pawn in a larger scheme, one that could cost him far more than freedom. No one knew where he had gone, or who could be trusted. Friends, family, enemies, everyone seemed capable of betrayal. The fire had done its work, not by destroying wealth, but by scattering attention and planting seeds of doubt. Marcus's absence became a mystery, a question that haunted every corridor of power in Memphis. Every whispered conversation, every hurried glance over the shoulder carried the weight of potential danger. The city's elite, intoxicated by wealth and secrets, underestimated one truth. The most dangerous plots are often hidden in plain sight, moving faster than anyone dares to notice. And so, as smoke rose over the warehouses and the night swallowed the city, Marcus Thornton's story took a decisive turn. The schemers believed they were in control, that every piece had been moved according to their will. But in truth, the fire had ignited more than timber and goods. It had ignited fear, suspicion, and the beginning of a chain of events that would consume all involved. One man's disappearance was about to unravel years of greed, deception, and cruelty. And Marcus, though unseen, was already changing the rules of the game. The Harrington estate was unusually silent that morning. Rooms that had once echoed with bustling servants now stood empty, a sense of unease settling over every corridor. It was soon discovered. Marcus Thornton was gone. No one saw him leave, no note was left behind, and the estate staff were left in shock. Whispers ran like wildfire through the grand halls, questions hung in the air, and even the normally composed Harringtons appeared shaken. How could someone so closely watched simply vanish? The answer was anything but simple, and the calm of the early morning quickly gave way to confusion and fear. Every glance from the servants carried suspicion. Every footstep felt heavier, as though the very walls themselves knew a secret they were powerless to reveal. News of Marcus's disappearance spread quickly to the Dalton and Caendish households. Chaos erupted in both mansions as families frantically tried to piece together what had happened. The Daltons accused the Harringtons, the Caendish whispered of betrayal, and through it all, fear of scandal loomed over every conversation. Marcus had not just disappeared, he had destabilized the delicate balance of wealth, power, and reputation that held these families together. Letters were sent, inquiries were made, and yet the truth remained elusive. Everyone believed they had a clue, yet no one could grasp the larger game unfolding beneath their very eyes. The city itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable revelation. Meanwhile, a stable hand at the Harrington estate reported seeing a carriage moving in the dead of night. The vehicle, shrouded in darkness, had left the property without any recognizable passengers. Initial assumptions suggested Marcus had been kidnapped, but the direction of the carriage, the timing, and the lack of resistance left room for doubt. Who had orchestrated this, and to what end? The story grew murkier with every retelling. Misleading accounts began to surface, some implicating servants, others pointing to rival families. But all of it was a deliberate misdirection. Marcus was already taking control of his own fate, silently maneuvering pieces on a board that no one else fully understood. Into this chaos stepped Silas Ketch, a man feared across Memphis and beyond. Known for his ruthless methods as a slave catcher, Silas was a predator in human form. When he arrived at the Harrington estate, the urgency of his presence was unmistakable. He questioned every servant, inspected every room, and pieced together fragments of information with unnerving efficiency. Yet even Silas, a man who thrived on certainty and control, sensed the unusual nature of Marcus's disappearance. There was more at play than a simple abduction, and for the first time, even Silas hesitated, aware that he was entering a labyrinth designed to trap the unwary. Marcus Thornton, however, was no ordinary victim. While the city and its elite scrambled, he had already set into motion a plan far larger than anyone imagined. Every disappearance, every rumor, and every accusation was being used to his advantage. The young man's intellect and foresight turned what seemed like vulnerability into power. As Harringtons, Daltons, and Caendish alike fumed in frustration, Marcus's invisible hand was moving pieces into place. He understood the motives of those around him, the weaknesses of each family, and the leverage he could exploit. Chaos was not just circumstance, it was strategy. As days passed, the search intensified, but so did Marcus's control over the unfolding narrative. Letters, sightings, and reports were intercepted or manipulated, and every misstep by the authorities or the families furthered his objectives. Silas Ketch, relentless as he was, began to notice patterns he could not ignore. Each clue pointed not to a hapless victim, but to a player who was shaping events from the shadows. The fire, the disappearance, and the family's panic were all part of a larger orchestration. Marcus was turning his apparent vulnerability into a weapon, a silent force that none of the city's powerful men could predict or stop. And so Memphis found itself gripped by a tension it had never experienced before. The disappearance of Marcus Thornton was no longer just a scandal. It was a crisis that exposed the fragility of wealth, power, and morality in the city. Families that once held unquestioned influence found themselves scrambling, and even the most ruthless hunters and schemers were forced to reconsider their positions. Marcus, invisible to the eyes of those chasing him, had become a ghost, a master of misdirection and the architect of a plan whose consequences would echo far beyond the streets of Memphis. In the shadows, the stage was set, and the true story of power, vengeance, and cunning was only beginning. Elellanena Thornton, Marcus's mother, was a woman whose quiet demeanor concealed a mind sharp as a razor. For years she had observed the dealings of Memphis's elite, cataloging secrets, noting weaknesses, and quietly amassing knowledge that could one day serve a purpose. When her son was taken, she didn't panic. She didn't beg. She acted. Each step she took was calculated, a chess master positioning pieces in anticipation of the moment when the city's most powerful families would be forced to face the consequences of their own corruption. Hidden letters, secret documents, and meticulously compiled evidence became her arsenal. The Harringtons, Daltons, and Caendish families were about to learn that the young man they had thought powerless had a mother whose influence extended far beyond the walls of her modest home. The evidence Elellanena compiled was devastating. Illegal slave trades that had been meticulously hidden behind layers of false accounting, bribery paid to politicians and law enforcement, financial manipulations that enriched these families at the expense of others. Every paper, every ledger, every signed note told a story of greed and moral decay. She had worked in shadows, gathering proof that would ensure the elite of Memphis could no longer operate with impunity. And yet, her strategy was patient. She did not confront them directly at first. She let the tension build, the paranoia fester, and the whispers grow louder among the powerful. By the time she acted, the ground would already be trembling beneath them. The impact of her revelations rippled immediately through the city. Among the Harringtons, Daltons, and Caendish, fear became palpable. No one knew who could be trusted, and every glance was suspicious. The whispers that had once been confined to servants and minor merchants now reached the drawing rooms of the elite. Questions of loyalty, integrity, and safety plagued every conversation. Memphis society, built on rigid hierarchies and assumed control, began to fracture. For the first time, the families realized that power was fragile, and that someone they had dismissed, someone they had thought insignificant, could wield influence that shook the very foundations of their world. Elellanenna's plan was not merely about revenge, it was about control. Every revelation, every piece of evidence released strategically, was designed to manipulate behavior, to bend the powerful to her will without direct confrontation. She understood human nature intimately, the fear, the pride, the desire to protect one's reputation at any cost. By quietly orchestrating events from the shadows, she forced the elite into a dance they could not refuse. And Marcus, far from being a passive victim, had become her partner in this intricate game. Each disappearance, each rumor, and every orchestrated panic served to distract, mislead, and ultimately trap the families into facing the truth they had spent so long hiding. As the families scrambled to respond, Memphis itself seemed to hold its breath. Business deals stalled, alliances fractured, and the usual certainties of wealth and influence no longer held. The mere mention of Marcus Thornton's name, or the hint that Elellanena had a hand in the unfolding events, sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened aristocrats. It was a slow, deliberate unraveling, each revelation placed like a careful stroke of a master artist. Suspense hung over the city, heavy and unrelenting, as whispers turned into panic and panic into action. The slow unveiling of Elellanena's strategy revealed just how deep the corruption went. Families realized that they had underestimated her, and worse, they had underestimated the boy they had treated as property. Marcus's intelligence and foresight, combined with his mother's cunning, had created a force that no amount of money or influence could suppress. The city's elite began to understand that the chaos they were experiencing was not random. It was engineered, and every step they took in desperation only played into the hands of a mother and son whose vision extended far beyond the ordinary. By the end of this dark chapter, the balance of power in Memphis had shifted. The Harringtons, Daltons, and Caendish were no longer untouchable. Fear, suspicion, and the realization of their own vulnerability dominated their every decision. And in the shadows, Elellanena and Marcus watched, patient, deliberate, and entirely in control. The message was clear. In a city built on slavery, greed, and corruption, the real power often lay with those who were underestimated. And those who dared to ignore it would soon pay a price they could never recover from. The letters arrived like thunder in the quiet drawing rooms of Memphis's most powerful families. Each envelope bore Elellanena Thornton's unmistakable handwriting, precise and deliberate, leaving no room for doubt about who was behind the revelations. Edmund Harrington, the proud patriarch, broke the seal first, his hands trembling despite years of practiced composure. The pages inside detailed the evidence: illegal trades, bribes, and financial manipulations that tied his family's fortune directly to crime and corruption. His eyes widened as he read the demands, each word slicing through his pride. The Harringtons were not the only recipients. The Daltons and Caendish families received identical letters, each exposing secrets they had long believed hidden. For the first time, these families felt fear that no wealth could counteract, and the magnitude of Elellanenna's reach became terrifyingly clear. The demands were as audacious as they were humiliating. Financial restitution to those wronged, public apologies to the community, the immediate freeing of certain enslaved individuals, and gestures of social humility designed to shatter their long-held pride. No family could ignore the instructions without risking public disgrace and legal consequences. As they convened behind closed doors, the weight of the situation became apparent. Some advocated compliance, fearing total ruin and the wrath of a mother scorned, while others, blinded by pride and anger, demanded retaliation, vowing to strike back against a woman they deemed insignificant. The room was thick with tension, every glance and whisper carrying the weight of centuries of unchallenged power. The debate raged through the day and into the night. Edmund Harrington, his face pale but determined, argued that submission would signal weakness to rivals and erode their influence permanently. Across the room, members of the Caendish family countered that capitulation would embolden others, inviting further attacks and challenges to their authority. The Daltons were torn between the two, fearful of public scandal, yet unwilling to appear cowardly. Every voice, every argument revealed the depth of desperation and the fragility of their social standing. In that room, decades of wealth and perceived invincibility felt almost meaningless against the meticulous planning of one woman and the brilliance of her son. They had been given a choice: destroy themselves to survive, or fight and risk everything. A whisper echoed through the halls of each estate, capturing the essence of their dilemma. Each family grappled with the implications of either path: financial ruin, social humiliation, or violent retaliation. and the uncertainty of what Elellanena had anticipated next. The fear was not just of exposure, but of losing control in a society that had always rewarded them for dominance and cruelty. As they deliberated, the reality settled in. Marcus Thornton was no longer merely a young man in their possession, and his mother was no longer a figure they could intimidate or ignore. Their lives, their legacies, and the delicate power they wielded now rested in the hands of those they had dismissed as powerless. As the hours passed, the atmosphere grew darker. Windows closed against the fading light of the Memphis sun, shadows creeping across the room, as if echoing the creeping dread in the hearts of the families. Every family member understood that a misstep could be fatal, not physically perhaps, but socially, financially, and morally. They could sense the inevitability of exposure, the slow dismantling of their carefully curated reputations, and the relentless march of justice executed with precision by a mother whose patience was matched only by her cunning. In that silence, each family knew that the next move would define them forever, and that the choice they made could either save or utterly destroy them. By nightfall, a tense, uneasy calm settled over the estates. The letters had done their work. Fear, suspicion, and debate had fractured the family's unity, leaving them vulnerable and reactive. Marcus and Elellanena watched from the shadows, the perfect distance away to observe every reaction, every misstep, and every sign of weakness. Their strategy was unfolding exactly as intended. The families who had once believed themselves untouchable now realized that the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. The scale of their reckoning had arrived, and the true extent of Elellanenna's plan would soon be revealed to a city that thought it knew the limits of control, power, and vengeance. The first shockwave hit the Daltons with a tragic inevitability. Jacob Dalton, once a man proud and unyielding, was found lifeless in his study. The city whispered of suicide, yet the truth was darker than most dared imagine. The pressure of exposure, the shame of public disgrace, and the realization that a mother and her son had outmaneuvered one of the wealthiest families in Memphis became unbearable. Every servant, neighbor, and distant relative sensed the shift, a silent acknowledgement that power could be so easily stripped away. Jacob's death sent ripples through the elite circles, a grim warning of the consequences of underestimating those they considered weak or insignificant. Meanwhile, the Caendish family faced its own inexplicable tragedy. Richard Caendish, the man who had schemed so tirelessly, died under suspicious circumstances. Some whispered of an accident, others of foul play, an unseen hand ensuring that the family's complicity in corruption would not go unpunished. The mysterious nature of his demise heightened fear across the city, leaving the Caendishes fractured and paranoid. Every alliance, every secret, every past sin now seemed vulnerable to exposure. The families were no longer merely at risk of social humiliation. They were facing irreversible consequences, both moral and physical, for their arrogance. Amid this turmoil, the Harringtons found themselves standing exposed. Their carefully constructed facades of control and dominance were crumbling under the weight of truth. Edmund Harrington, once the embodiment of pride and authority, struggled with guilt, knowing that his choices and the exploitation of Marcus had contributed to this cascade of tragedy. His son Charles, however, took a different view, advocating for compliance, arguing that cooperation with Elellanena was the only way to salvage what remained of their family's fortune and honor. The tension between father and son reflected the larger struggle of all Memphis elite families, the battle between pride and survival, arrogance and humility, past sins and present reckoning. The streets of Memphis seemed to mirror the uncertainty of the elite, empty, quiet, haunted by whispers of scandal and death. Newspaper clippings spread the story like wildfire, documenting suicides, suspicious deaths, and the relentless unraveling of families once thought untouchable. The citizens watched as power shifted, understanding for the first time that wealth and influence could not shield a person from cunning, justice, or vengeance. Every shadowed corner and abandoned estate carried the weight of fear, a tangible reminder that the balance of power had been forever altered. Elellanena Thornton, silent and calculating, observed the fallout with the patience of a strategist who had long anticipated these outcomes. Marcus, her son, had become more than a symbol. He was the instrument through which justice was exacted, and every reaction from the families confirmed the precision of their plan. Edmund, Charles, and the surviving members of the Harrington household faced a stark reality. Negotiation was no longer optional, and every choice from this point forward would determine whether they could reclaim even a fraction of their former status. The ghosts of the Daltons and Caendishes served as reminders of the cost of defiance. By the end of this dark chapter, the city of Memphis had changed. Families that once ruled through fear and wealth now operated under caution, suspicion, and the unspoken understanding that one miscalculation could bring ruin. Elellanena had proven that intellect, courage, and meticulous planning could topple even the most entrenched power. Marcus, once a boy trapped in a system built to exploit him, had emerged as both a symbol and a participant in a story that would haunt the city for generations. The fallout was only the beginning, but the lesson was clear. True power was never held by those who claimed it. It was held by those who understood how to wield it with precision, patience, and unyielding resolve. The long-awaited meeting between the Harringtons and the Thorntons finally took place, a gathering charged with tension, fear, and anticipation. Edmund Harrington, once proud and unyielding, entered the room with the weight of guilt pressing on his shoulders. Charles Harrington followed, visibly conflicted, caught between loyalty to his family and the undeniable cleverness of Elellanena. Across from them stood Elellanena Thornton, composed and deliberate, her eyes reflecting both sorrow and determination. Marcus, her son, stood tall, a silent witness to the reckoning, his intelligence and calm presence a stark contrast to the turmoil surrounding him. Every word spoken, every pause, carried immense significance, for the decisions made here would determine not only the fates of the Harringtons, but also the balance of power across Memphis society. Marcus, though young, displayed a clarity and maturity that left no room for manipulation. He expressed his decision to leave Memphis, to go north, away from the suffocating chains of the city and the shadows of families that had once claimed him as property. His departure was not born of anger, but of strategy, of reclaiming his life and ensuring that no one could ever again use him as a pawn in their schemes. Elellanena's voice, steady and commanding, guided the conversation, making her terms clear. Compliance from the Harringtons in exchange for mercy, restitution, and the preservation of their remaining dignity. Her plan was meticulous, allowing them a path to atonement while ensuring that justice was served. Edmund Harrington, faced with undeniable evidence and the formidable presence of mother and son, finally acquiesced. He agreed to comply with every demand, freeing his slaves, resigning from positions of influence, and providing financial resources to repair the wrongs caused by his family. Charles Harrington, though initially hesitant, supported his father's decision, understanding that resistance would only bring further ruin. The room, once thick with tension, began to release a fragile air of relief, for a resolution, hard-earned, strategic, and just, was taking shape. Every action they took was both punishment and redemption, a calculated acknowledgement that power misused would always demand a price. For Elellanena, this moment represented more than victory. It was the culmination of years of vigilance, courage, and relentless planning. Justice had been exacted, but it was tempered by mercy, not the blind mercy of law, but the deliberate, measured mercy of a woman determined to protect her son while ensuring that those who had exploited him faced consequences. Marcus, poised and resolute, stood as both heir and architect of this new order, a symbol that intellect, courage, and moral fortitude could overcome the greed and corruption of even the wealthiest families. Every decision reinforced the lesson that true power lay not in dominance or fear, but in vision, patience, and an unwavering commitment to justice. As the meeting concluded, the city of Memphis began to sense the ripple effects of this resolution. News traveled slowly at first, but whispers spread. The Harringtons were complying, restitution was underway, and a new precedent had been set. Families across the city, once untouchable in their wealth and influence, now faced the reality that cunning, courage, and moral clarity could challenge entrenched power. Elellanena and Marcus's example became a quiet but undeniable message. No one, no matter how powerful, was beyond accountability. The balance of power had shifted, leaving a city forever changed. By the end of this chapter, the Thorntons had reclaimed more than justice. They had reclaimed dignity, control, and the ability to determine their own fate. Marcus prepared for his journey north, stepping into a future of opportunity, freedom, and self-determination. Elellanena remained in Memphis just long enough to ensure the Harringtons' compliance, her presence a reminder that vigilance and strategy were as essential as courage. For once, in a world shaped by greed and exploitation, the story concluded not with vengeance alone, but with justice tempered by mercy, proving that one determined woman and her son could outmaneuver a city built on corruption, leaving a legacy that would echo for generations to come. The aftermath of the Thornton confrontation left Memphis society forever altered. The Harringtons, once dominant and feared, survived but only just. Their wealth and influence remained, yet the social stigma of their actions lingered, a shadow they could not escape. The public knew of their compliance with Elellanena''s demands, and whispers of their previous abuses followed them like an invisible chain. Charles and Edmund both faced private guilt, a heavy burden that no amount of wealth could alleviate. Though they retained a semblance of power, they were diminished, cautious, and forever aware that cunning and morality, when wielded correctly, could topple even the mightiest. The Dalton and Caendish families fared far worse. Socially humiliated and financially ruined, their reputations crumbled like fragile parchment in the hands of those who once envied them. Friends turned away, business connections dissolved, and creditors reminded them constantly of the consequences of greed and corruption. In the alleys of Memphis, the names Dalton and Caendish became synonymous with downfall, a warning whispered in drawing rooms and marketplaces alike. Their misdeeds, once hidden behind wealth and influence, were now public knowledge, leaving them powerless and isolated. Marcus Thornton, freed from the chains of his city and its powerful families, embarked on a life marked by purpose and resilience. Though details are scarce, it is believed he journeyed north, finding work with the law and perhaps even the Underground Railroad. He became a quiet force for justice, using his intelligence and courage to guide others toward freedom and opportunity. Marcus's presence in the north symbolized hope for those trapped by oppression, a living testament that even in the darkest times, one person's determination could alter the course of many lives. Elellanena Thornton, having orchestrated this intricate reckoning, dedicated the remainder of her life to charity, advocacy, and protection of the vulnerable. Her work ensured that her son's freedom was not a singular triumph, but part of a broader legacy of compassion, courage, and justice. Though she eventually passed away, her influence lingered, not only in the lives she touched, but in the lessons her actions imparted to a city built on cruelty and exploitation. Memphis remembered her not just as a mother protecting her son, but as a symbol of strategic moral authority, capable of reshaping the fate of a society. This story, in its essence, is far greater than the personal journeys of Marcus and Elellanena. It serves as a moral lens through which to examine greed, power, and the consequences of ignoring humanity in pursuit of profit. The Harringtons' survival, the Daltons' ruin, and the Caendish's fall all reveal a pattern. Those who exploit others for wealth or status will inevitably face reckoning. Choices matter, and the conscience, even when delayed, can impose its own form of justice. Marcus and his mother remind us that courage, intelligence, and moral fortitude can defy the darkest structures of oppression. This story isn't just about one man in 1851. It's about choices, power, and the price of ignoring humanity in pursuit of profit. Its echo reaches far beyond the streets of Memphis, speaking to all generations about accountability, the potential of courage, and the transformative power of justice guided by conscience. Those who listen carefully will see that history is never merely a record of events. It is a living lesson, and the story of Marcus Thornton and Elellanena Thornton stands as one of its most compelling reminders. The tale of Marcus Thornton and the powerful families that sought to control him exposes the darkest corners of human ambition. It shows the lengths some will go to protect wealth, status, and secrets, and the courage it takes to fight against injustice. Marcus's intelligence and Elellanena''s relentless strategy remind us that bravery and cunning can overturn even the most entrenched systems of power. Imagine yourself in their shoes. Would you have had the strength to resist, to outmaneuver those who believed you were nothing more than property? History is filled with stories like this, stories of oppression, greed, and moral courage that demand to be remembered, retold, and learned from. If this story has stirred something in you, make sure to keep the memory of these truths alive. Subscribe to Noctivox Dark Stories, hit the notification bell, and share this video with others who appreciate history's hidden shadows. Each view, each share, ensures that these lessons of power, greed, conscience, and courage are not lost to time. History may seem distant, but its echoes shape our present, and stories like Marcus Thornton's remind us to question what we think we know, to seek truth, and to honor those who dared to defy injustice. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember, the past often speaks louder than the present realizes.